Josh, what do Kushner students, I'm recording a video by the way, what do Kushner students and this week's Parsha have in common? They're both finally free! And these Kushner students are choosing to learn Torah over their winter vacation, which is very impressive. Kol hakavod, guys. I thought what would be interesting is to take a look at what do the Jewish people choose to do with their freedom, right? In last week's Parsha or this week's Parsha, depending on when you're listening to the video, the Jewish people are freed. They sing Az Yashir. Miriam has whipped out her tupim and her mimcholot, and they're dancing and they're singing, and it's so happy, and they recognize God, and the Egyptians have been done with, and it's such a wonderful feeling. What I want to take a look at today is actually what happens right afterwards when the instruments have been put away and they're beginning this like normal life, going through the desert together. What's the story that happens? Basically, it's the first time that the people like grumble. The pasuk says, Vayasa Moshe Israel mi Yamsuf, Vayetzu el Midbar Shur. So they leave from Yamsuf and they go to Midbar Shur. Vayachu Shoshe Amim Bamidbar. And they go for 3 days in the desert. And what happens? Velo matzu mayim. They couldn't find any water. Vayavo marata velo yachlu lishtot mayim mimara. And they get to a place with water, but what happens? They can't drink it because it's bitter water. It's like salty water, like what we have on Pesach. Ki marim heim, because it was bitter. Al ken karashma mara. So therefore they call the place Mara. Okay, this is the first time that people grumble. I know from learning Sefer Bamidbar, and I'm sure you remember from learning Sefer Bamidbar also, the Jewish people all the time are complaining for reasons that were not appropriate. But this complaint, this one seems legitimate. I don't know how many of you have ever like been in the desert before for more than a couple of hours, like when you're on a tiyol in Israel. Running out of water, it's not a joke. It's like a really big deal, and especially you can imagine the Jewish people, they were like with little kids not having water, or the elderly not having water. They were in the desert. They didn't know all the miracles that were going to happen. They knew Kriyat Yamsuf happened, but they didn't know that later on Moshe would be hitting from the rock and that they were going to be getting man. This is their very first steps, and it was really, really scary for them. So it's cool to see, actually, that God here, as opposed to the other times, he doesn't get angry. Moshe doesn't get angry either. This is what happens. So they go to Moshe and they say, Manishtah, what are we supposed to drink? They call out to God. Hashem eats. Okay, so basically God shows him this tree. I have a visual for you over here with my Moshe Rabbeinu action figure. And God shows him this tree, and he tells him to throw it into water, and that's going to make the water sweet. Should I do it? It's the water, and the water becomes sweet, and then they were able to drink. But then something a little strange happens. Sam lo chok mishpat. There God gives them chok mishpat, like judgments and statutes. V'sham nisahu, and there he tested them or gave them this experience. Vayomer, and God says, Im shamo tishma l'kol Hashem elokacha. If you listen to the voice of God, ve'yashar b'einav taseh, and you do what's good in His eyes, v'azanta l'mitzvotav, v'shmarta kol chukav, kol machala asher santi b'mitzrayim, lo asim alacha ki ani Hashem rofecha. If you follow my ways, everything's going to be good. If you follow these klukim, if you follow these mishpatim, then everything's going to be great. Okay, this also is like a little bit strange. What are these laws that Hashem's giving to them? Was he testing them? Because if he is, it doesn't really seem to be a fair test, because I think we all would call out for water. That seems to be a very natural thing to do. What should they have done otherwise, right? We'd expect them when they need something to be able to ask God for it or call out for it. That might be why God's response isn't anger. But I think if we look more closely, there's actually a lot more going on here. There's a sub-story happening here that has to do with the fact that afterwards there's this chok umishpat and the promises about listening to God and obeying His commandments. So what we have to figure out, and what our big question is how does this water story and the emphasis on God's law and Bnei Israel's acceptance of it, how does that all fit into a single story? So, the Rashbam has a very cool shot that I want to share with you. And he says as follows, Sham sam l'chok mishpat v'sham yisa'il, Sham b'mara al yedei alilot hanisayon asher sham lahatzmi'im l'mayim v'achar kach rifei lahem et hamayim. I'll translate here. So there at Mara, through like the fabrication of a test, God made them thirst for water, and then he healed the water for them. And there God began to demonstrate to them that if they keep the chukim u'mishpatim, what he's going to teach them, then he'll provide them for their needs. Basically, it seems to be like a complete setup, right? God leads them on this route where there wasn't going to be any water for them. He guided them to these bitter Mara waters, and then he heals them. He creates this entire scenario. Why is God doing this? Right? What's his message here? So the Rashbam explains that God is teaching the Jewish people the most basic of lessons, that the national fortune of this people is tied up with their adherence to the word of Hashem. And this lesson is also like one of the central themes of Torah. God shows them how he can provide for their basic necessities, and at the same time, he begins to talk about Torah and a new way of life. So the pasuk tells us that they were taught these chukim u'mishpatim. According to Rashi, actually, it was here that Hashem presented them with their first ever commandments. So I just want to focus on one really cool thing that Rav Alex Israel points out. He is a very critical reader of the text, and he looks specifically at the time span that the Torah chooses to tell us about, right? Why does it decide to tell us that it's going to be that the Jewish people were traveling for 3 days, right? They walked for 3 days, velo matzu mayim. Why is that fact about 3 days so important? Well, what was supposed to happen after 3 days? Also a close reader of the text will remember that 3 days is a trigger. Actually, Moshe has mentioned this phrase, and Hashem has mentioned this phrase 3 days. I think I counted 6 other times, right? Moshe says to Paro, Derech shloshet yamim nelech. We want to go out, right? We want to go out and serve Hashem. We want to go for 3 days bamidbar v'zavachnu Hashem Elokeinu and give him these sacrifices. Moshe actually never says to God, let my people go, and stops there. He always says, Shlach atami, send out my people v'yavduni, and let them serve God. Let them serve Hashem. It was always attached to this thing that they were going to be doing after 3 days. So here we see they traveled 3 days, and something was supposed to happen, right? They were supposed to have some sort of maybe like religious ceremony. I don't know what the Zvachim exactly, what they were supposed to be doing, but something was supposed to happen after 3 days, but I don't know. All we have here is that they couldn't find water, right? So what are we supposed to take out of this? Okay, the Midrash Tanchuma, says by way of a mashal and a nimshal, tells us that the people were looking for water. But what's the water a metaphor for? For Torah! The Jewish people were looking for Torah. And I give this as the reason why the Torah is actually read publicly 3 times, Monday, Thursday, and on Shabbos, so that the people would never go 3 days without learning Torah. Other elements of the story are also reminiscent of the Torah theme. The word vayorehu, that God showed Moshe the tree, is an unusual unusual way to say the word, containing the root of the word Torah. Vayorehu has the shoresh Torah in it. God showed him, The imagery of the sweetening of the water also reminds us of one of our favorite psukim, Eitz Chaim hi l'machazikim ba, right? That's similar to the Eitz Chaim from Sefer Breshit that we all just learned so much about, that you just took your midterm on, that if we had eaten from that Eitz Chaim instead of from the Eitz Hadat, then it could have been a tree of life for us. It could have allowed us to live. So with this theory of Rav Alex Israel, what actually were the Jewish people looking for? Well, they were looking for water, but on a much deeper level, they were looking for Torah. They were looking for spiritual sustenance, which is just as essential to a person as the physical sustenance is. And certainly this slave nation, these Jewish people, they were lacking both of them. Hashem aims to provide food for the body and for the soul. So the Midrash found a very important parallel and parable. for this parsha is about finding Torah just as much as it is about finding water. And after leaving Egypt and all of that and getting away from that scene, God takes the Jewish people through the wilderness and he begins to build this relationship with them. And his aim is through this series of events to teach them the Torah and teach them that it really can be a source of life. So now it's true that we're free. We're free from school now. We're leaving to Costa Rica tomorrow, and we're so excited. But free as a Jew, it doesn't just mean to do whatever we want. And just by the fact that you're watching this means that you know that. But it means that we're finding Torah. We're using the Torah to guide us, and we're finding our own spiritual sustenance. So keep learning, and happy vacation, and looking forward to learning with you when we get back. Bye.